Good day. Today I want to talk about the Victory Day parade that took place in Moscow on May 9th. The Victory Day parade was celebrating the 80th anniversary of the end of the World War II. But this particular year, the Victory Day parade had a much bigger significance than the end of the World War II. You can actually say the Victory Day parade is also a parade that celebrated the death of the unipolar world and the birth of the multipolar world. It was there for all to see. It was such a grandiose occasion, and it was one where Russian President Vladimir, look at me talking about Putin had over these years planned meticulously to have this event take place. He invited quite a number of world leaders, including some European leaders, and quite a number of leaders attended that event. In fact, there were 29 leaders from what I gather from the list here. We have 29 leaders who attended the Victory Day parade with Putin. The parade marked, like I said, it marked a significant geopolitical milestone. While many people were looking at that parade as something that was show, it celebrated the victory of the USSR, the Soviet Union over Nazi Germany. In the attendance of so many presidents, the president of Belarus, China, Slovakia, Serbia, and Azerbaijan and Tajikistan, so many presidents, including African presidents and our own Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, President Abdel Fattah Sisi of Egypt, Zimbabwe's Emerson Mnangagwa, all of these African leaders, including Ethiopian leader Abiy Ahmed, signified a change in the world. Why do I say this? For the past 3 years, but much more longer than that, Russia has been fighting what you will say is the collective West. The collective West brought to bear serious pain on Russia in over 22,000 rounds of sanctions, and in an attempt to bring NATO close to Russia via Ukraine, and Russia said no. Resistance of Russia led to ultimately what you say, the Ukrainian war. Russia always says that the Ukrainian war was started because of the closeness of NATO to Russia, the attempt to bring NATO to Ukraine. Russia stood firmly against that decision and took military action against it, and thought to shred every single agreement they had prior to February 24th, 2022, when the hot war really started. But long before that, there had been so many attempts to undermine Russia, and Russia stood firm, defended its sovereignty, and moved into Ukraine, and has so far seized 4 Ukrainian regions, namely Lugansk, Zaporizhia, the Donbass, and a significant part of even Kharkiv. So Russia stood against the attempt by the West to impose its will on them. And Russia wouldn't have been able to do this if they didn't enjoy the support of some very significant countries in the other parts of the world, notably China and India. But for Russia, they always considered their immediate environment to be a threat. So they kept very, very close relationships with their Central Asian countries, especially Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, all the stands there. And this celebration of the 80th anniversary of the end of Nazi Germany and the victory over Nazi Germany it had such a very grand occasion, grand meaning to the Russians this time around, because it meant that for the Russians, it signified that they had overcome, and it also signified that the world is really changing. Let us look at some of the periods of that parade. Marching across. So Grand Square now. Through this video, we have seen that the Russians were able to assemble a very large amount of people, heads of government of the other part of the world, mostly the BRIC countries. Unfortunately, India couldn't make it to this particular event because there's a hot war, almost a war going on between India and Pakistan now. But India and China and Venezuela and many of those countries that have had the wrath of the Western governments, those in G7, were the ones who have come and coalesced around Russia in this time. It just shows that the world has changed. There's a new political order in the world. And this new political order has created a multipolar world where China has the economic backing, the economic strength, is the economic foundation of that whole structure, this new, and then Russia is the security because of its extensive military know-how and extensive military strength. But even China, because they've not had a war for a long time, doesn't mean that they've built up their military. And at this moment in time, they are acknowledged to be the biggest. They have the biggest navy in the world and one of the most sophisticated military hardware, especially in these days where it's only Russia, it's only China and America that are applying the full abilities of AI in military hardware. But for me, my interest is in the Africans. We saw Abdul Sisi of Egypt. For Egypt, they've had a long relationship with the Soviet Union. They are very close to a very belligerent Israel, and for that, they've always had the backing of the Soviet Union in trying to counterbalance the interest of Israel and the Americans. Egypt has had a long history, military history. They've drawn their military hardware from the Soviet Union. But in recent times, in these times of peace, even though there's still a lot of conflict going on in the Middle East, Egypt has become very reliant on Russia for wheat. Russia has become the greatest producers of wheat in the world. And to that extent, Egypt has become very reliant on Russia for its wheat supply. But beyond that also, it's also dependent on for a lot of help, financial help regarding their economy, because there's been a lot of growth and expansion of the Egyptian economy, and it has been under strain for a while now. So while Egypt has been shopping for funds from the Middle Eastern countries of Saudi Arabia, UAE, in order to stay, their argument is always that you need to support us so that the Islamic Brotherhood and Islamic fundamentalism doesn't take root in Egypt. Egypt has relied very heavily on the Soviet Union and now on Russia as a more reliable partner and counterweight to Western interest. But there's also Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, they're represented by their president, Emerson Mnangagwa. Zimbabwe would probably not have been existing anymore if it wasn't for the Russians, Putin particularly. Vladimir Putin made sure that he supported Robert Mugabe at a time when even he himself was not too amenable to going against the interest of the West, because at that time, the Russians were trying to get close to the West. They were tolerating most of the actions of the West. And when the West sanctioned even close allies like Serbia, Russia didn't do much at that time. But when they sanctioned Zimbabwe for the policies of Robert Mugabe, it was the Russians who, to a large extent, helped to stabilize, to support the economy of Zimbabwe. When we now talk of the young Captain Ibrahim Traore, who is making so much waves all over the world now, he represents a new genre of military leaders. He represents the new, the gatekeepers and the people opening the gate to Russian growing influence in Africa. He is the face of the penetration of Russia in the Sahel. He has somehow won favor with Putin, and through his cooperation with the Russians, he has even gone ahead as far as saying that he would want the Russians to build a nuclear plant in Burkina Faso. He and three other leaders are the ones who have, through their actions, brought in the Russian influence in the Sahel. Him and the leader of Mali and Niger Republic. So Africa was well represented there. As regards to Ethiopia, we know that Ethiopia and Egypt have had a conflict in recent times, and that conflict had made the Ethiopians to fall under the sanctions of America. In this time when Ethiopia is at war, first with its and internally, it had a civil war with the Tigrayan region, but it also has its eye and it has conflict with Egypt because of the grand dam that was built in Ethiopia. Ethiopia insisted that they had a right to build the Grand Renaissance Dam, and they built it. But there's this threat by the Egyptians that they probably will blow up that or go to war with Ethiopia. So it makes sense that if the West is sanctioning Ethiopia, Ethiopia should find powerful allies. They found one in Erdogan, the Turkish president, but it is also important that they continue to be in global forums like the opportunity presented by Vladimir Putin in creating this forum where they can interface with China, they can interface with North Korea, and interface with all the people who can help them break sanctions, give them military hardware, support them in case war breaks out with Egypt. So Africa was well represented there. But you ask, why was there no Nigeria, no Ghana, no South Africa? South Africa, funny enough, has been a member of the BRICS. Ramaphosa should have been there, but unfortunately, Ramaphosa wasn't there. I don't know if this is due to internal politics or due to the fact that Putin has been a no-show in two major global events that South Africa had hosted. The first being the BRICS summit, and the second one being the G7 summit, even though he was not supposed to have been in the G7 summit anyway. So South Africa was not there. That's very disappointing. We don't know the full range of reasons why South Africa wasn't there, but South Africa wasn't there, and South Africa are close allies of the Russians. Also, Nigeria wasn't there. Quite a lot of Kenya wasn't there. These countries that are democracies and are close to America are worried more about the fragility in their democracies. They know that as much as they, if they identify with the Russians, there's a crisis. There may be crisis within their democracies. Their democracies are fragile. Ruto of Kenya has become very close to the American presidency. He was more close to Biden, but we don't know how close he is now to to Trump. The Nigerian president, much as Nigeria has applied to be a partner or have even been admitted as a partner in BRICS, they have tried to try to avoid geopolitical alignments. Ghana to Cote d'Ivoire, so many other African countries that are huge democracies are still have knowing they know the strong influence of both their colonial masters and the West and America in there. So they may be very careful and they may not have taken part in it. But regardless, this was a clear statement of the fact that this world has changed. In coming together, Russia and China have shown the world that we are together. They reaffirmed through different meetings and through different press statements that they are now resolved to fight against the collective West. It's such a very bad situation for those in Europe, particularly because China is so hard to them. With America being very, very unreliable as a partner, China is where they still have the growing market in China and the growing the openness of the China market and the vastness of the China market is still where many of them still do relatively well. Volkswagen particularly sells over 3, 4, 5 million cars in China in a year, but they would barely sell 300,000 cars in America. And this same thing too happens to many German companies, many French companies, many Spanish companies. So somehow they don't seem to have that kind of influence and leverage against China as they would have had 20, 25 years ago. And it is to their horror that they are seeing this emerging reality. They are caught between a very tempestuous Donald Trump and then a China that they don't really know is taking away their bread and bacon because China is now innovating way more than the Germans, way more than the Italians, and taking their markets in cars, in solar panels, and so many things. China has become such an economic threat to them. So that market they used to enjoy is now a threat to them. And they are caught in this reality that is very confusing for them. But the world has shifted, and the world's shifting was very clear for all to see in the May Day parade that just ended. Come again to the end of today's topic. If you have any comments and any suggestions, or if you have a contrary opinion about what I've just said, put them in the comment section. I do think seriously that that victory parade was the beginning of a new reality in the world. It has started long ago, but it was commemorated very clearly for all to see on May 9th, on a beautiful sunny day on May 9th in Moscow. Subscribe to my channel so that we can grow. I'll continue to output this. Subscribe, like, share, make a comment, and give me any feedback. Make suggestions on topics you may want me to talk about. See you next time. Thank you.